My name is Marie Gervais, and I'm the host of the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast, where culture, communication, and context meet in the workplace. Discover what cultural influences have formed the careers of noteworthy leaders from around the world in a variety of professions by exploring the groups that shaped who they are today. Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Today, I have an honored guest, Dr. Nicholas Wahl, who is a K-12 education leader who spent 2 decades at the helm of prominent school districts in the Midwestern United States. During his time as superintendent, Dr. Wahl served public school systems with over 2,000 employees, 15,000 plus students, and annual budgets eclipsing $100 million. Dr. Wahl's leadership practice is grounded in building teams and coaching future leaders with the goal of ensuring there are no invisible students, which I love. And he says he uses that every year. He's taken this philosophy and mission to his work with ECRA. The ECRA Group is a premier research and analytics consulting firm that helps educational leaders improve student outcomes by adopting more evidence-based practices. Welcome, Nicholas Wahl.
Thank you, Maria. I feel honored to be on your program. Look forward to our conversation this morning.
Me too. So the bio is always more formal. And so I want to ask people who they are and what they do from a more personal standpoint. So I'm going to ask you the same thing.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, I spent 31 years working in public schools, anything from being a teacher to an athletic coach to an athletic director to a principal to assistant superintendent for 2 years and a superintendent for 16 years. And then in 2018, I decided to retire. And contrary to my former colleagues accusing me, I did not have any prolific moment where I knew that the pandemic was coming because I retired prior to. I feel for my former colleagues, and that's one of the reasons my mission now is to help school leaders across the nation get solutions, and in this case, analytic solutions in front of them to help them to do what they do and amplify their mission and vision for their school district. You know, that's just professionally me. I'm a dad. I have 4 children, well, they're 4 adults now, so they're doing their thing. I grew up in a very, very small town in southern Indiana called Ferdinand, Indiana, youngest of 6 children. Parents are still with us, 91 and 90. You know, we're rotating and providing care for them, but they're still doing as good as a 91 and 90-year-old can do. My dad was a high school principal for 25 years, so without a doubt, he was my role model and followed in his footsteps to become a school leader. He had and still has an amazingly positive demeanor every day. And he grew up in a family of 16 children. And when he was very young, his mother passed away and he lived a significant part of his childhood in an orphanage in southern Indiana. Back in the day, those orphanages were still in place. So I'm a product of parents that grew up in the Depression, and I am in the last year of the baby boomers in the United States. So that's quite a bit about me that imprints how I do what I do. And the no invisible children was a mantra I used as a principal for 8 years, a superintendent for 16, because like all of us, kids really want to have a connected, meaningful relationship with at least one person, preferably 2 in the school building. And the children that don't and the young adults that don't, those are the ones we need to be aware of and be intentional with our outreach. So I know that's a lot, Marie, but that kind of gives you a framework of where I'm at and where I came from.
Yeah, it's a great story because it shows the theme of education. It shows the theme of being one of many and possibly not being seen yourself, which I think is pretty significant for everyone on the planet. Every human being wants to be acknowledged and wants to be seen. And when they aren't, then they seek to belong to dangerous things like gangs or to lose hope entirely over a period of time, and to be suicidal or to want to kill other people. Those kinds of dangerous tendencies come from kids not being seen. And if they're seen and acknowledged as human beings on this planet at this time and important people, that just changes everything. I love the mantra, and I really have lots of questions about your story.
I'm looking forward to that conversation. But yeah, you make me think of when I was a teacher. My first year in teaching, I had taught in a very rural community, and then I moved into Lafayette, Indiana. And I was teaching sixth graders and seventh graders in a middle school environment. And then the second year in that building, I was interrupted by one of the school counselors in the middle of a class that I was teaching. That year I was teaching eighth graders. And she said, "We're going to cover your class. You need to come down to the guidance office." And I said, "Okay." So I went down to the guidance office and they said, "One of your students from last year, a sixth grader, and now a seventh grader, is locked himself in this office and will only talk to you." And I said, "Okay." So long and short of it was the student was suicidal and wanted to kill themselves in that room. So I was able to talk them out of that. And then myself, this was a female student, myself and a female counselor escorted her and took her to a residential care facility for students struggling with emotional needs. And she said the only reason she would talk to me is because I acknowledged her every day when I taught her, and I acknowledged her every day even when she wasn't in my class that year. I didn't know that, Marie. I just did not know that made that kind of difference on this young adult. And I'm sure that just grounded not only my belief, but my practice. And just like you said, all of us need to be noticed. And young adults, especially middle school kids and high school kids, all kids just need that sense of belonging. And so that was a very important and it imprinted me as a human and as an educator, the importance of acknowledging and celebrating kids every day.
I was also a teacher for many years, and I have a couple of moments that stand out for me as memories for me acknowledging students. And I hope that I did this more than just those few times, but I taught everything from nursery school up to university and all the grades. So I remember I was in a classroom with a group of kindergarten students on the first day. They were all sitting on the rug in front of me, and I was on a chair with a couple of puppets next to me. And I looked at those kids and I thought, I love all of you. It just hit me, right? And their faces just lit up. And two of them jumped up and they came up and they hugged me. And I hadn't said a word. I just thought, I just love you guys. And I think you can feel thoughts and emotions. And when children go through years with nobody acknowledging them and nobody thinking, I love you, it's terrible for them. When I taught junior high, I would walk down the hallway and I'd feel so bombarded by the sadness of students. And they weren't necessarily in my classes, but some of them, I would just feel that their sadness was so deep, so that I would make an effort to look for them every time I was walking down the hallways and to just shoot them a smile and see what the reaction was. And a couple of times the same thing happened. So after 2 or 3 times of doing this, one of those kids would come up and hug me, and they didn't know me, and they were awkward teenagers who didn't normally do that. And I think that was important. And I thought, how can I spread this more? How can I do more of this? But it didn't click at the time because I was pretty busy running the rest of my teaching responsibilities. But
Right.
those two memories made me think how important it is for a child to be acknowledged.
Oh, for sure. It's interesting as we're talking, I think about my time as a superintendent, especially cognizant of the massive teacher shortage across the United States and other places too. The acknowledgement of our teachers.
Oh, yeah. Never happened to me, even once in 17 years of teaching, not once acknowledged.
The interesting part on that is, again, it goes back to my experience with this young seventh grader back in the beginning of my teaching career. My first superintendency was a smaller district just outside Chicago. And I was a big fan of management by wandering as a principal. I wandered the building. I walked the building. I as a superintendent, I was very active and out into the buildings and just to be part of the community. And in my first superintendency in the small district, I would drop into the kindergarten classrooms. And if the teacher would be comfortable, I would read a story to the kids and give the teacher a break and then move on to the next classroom and building. I did that in one of the elementaries in my first district as a superintendent, and the kindergarten teacher, and then she was a reading specialist as well, was very open to me doing that. Would, then send me emails and say, you're welcome anytime. So I took her up on that. Unfortunately, she, unbeknownst to me, was suffering from incurable cancer.
Oh.
By the end of the school year, the cancer unfortunately won and she passed away.
Oh.
And so she passed away in the spring, and I received a call in my office from her sister who lived in another state. And she said, you made a significant impression in my sister's life when she was at her most difficult time. Would you speak at her funeral? I did. Obviously, I was very honored to do that. But again, it goes to honestly, I just enjoy doing that selfishly. I love reading to kids, but teachers so often go unnoticed too. Just to recognize, and she was a very good teacher, very good reading teacher, very good teacher of kids. You could tell kids loved being in her room. They loved interacting with her, but just recognizing our teachers who are just so important to development of not only our youth, but our country and whatever country you're in. But sadly, I don't think we recognize teachers and embrace them publicly and applaud them.
Yeah.
And we need to do that.
We do. We totally do. I'd like to ask you if you can share a couple of incidents from your childhood that you think affected your senses culturally and as a leader. I'm sure you have many.
I think I was very drawn to teaching middle school kids. I just had a very natural connection and felt like I could empathize with the challenges they face. When they come in as a sixth grader, they're really basically just a little bit more than an elementary age child, emotionally, physically, etc. But by the time they're eighth graders, I mean, that's just a huge chasm between the sixth and eighth grade student and the growth period, social, emotionally, physically, and just the unknown. And I believe the reason I am drawn to that, back to your question, what was a formative experience? When I was in middle school, which would be junior high back in the day, but when they called it junior high, I experienced being ostracized by your peer group for no reason that I actually know. I'm honest, I don't know. There really doesn't have to be a reason. But walking through after you get your lunch, go to your lunch table, and intentionally there's no seat for you. I experienced that, which was a significant imprint on me emotionally as a seventh, eighth grader, and really changed my perspective on peers and who I spent time with. And I know that carried over to my teaching with kids. And I recently did consulting with a nonprofit here in Indiana, and they had a summer seminar, they call it. And I went and spent 5 hours there, and I was watching the interaction of these sophomores, soon to be juniors, interacting. And I was talking with one of the adult leaders. And I said, you can see the kids that are not interacting and are ostracized. And she goes, how do you know that? And I said, I can show you who they are right now. And she goes, oh my. And I said, you don't want any invisible kids at this summer seminar because it's going to be traumatic. They're staying 5 days, 4 nights. And so she's like, oh my gosh. And that was not what I was supposed to be doing. But intuitively, I talked with many of these kids. She then and the other volunteers and leaders did. But I know that experiencing that myself, I guess it makes me keenly aware of that. I want to do everything I can to make sure no one feels that.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And a lot of men can't think of any incidents in their childhood where they felt vulnerable. And consequently, they can't empathize with other people's vulnerability. So it causes toxic issues in society. So I think that memory that you just remembered about being ostracized in middle school, and how that affected you later is really important.
Yeah, it wasn't and is significant, and who I am and who I became, who I'm becoming. We're all in that practice,
We are. We're always constantly becoming until the moment we die, and then we're becoming in another way.
There you go.
Yeah. So what about your adolescence or your young adulthood? How about some memories from there?
I think 2 things in high school that really heavily motivated me. In my high school, you met with your high school counselor, like beginning of your junior year, to plan out, your post-secondary. So I walked into the counselor's office, and I'm one of 6 kids. I had 5 siblings, came through the same high school. So I sat down in there, and the counselor goes, you're not as smart as your brother. My brother next to me in age was valedictorian 2 years prior. He goes, you're not as smart as your brother. You may be able to go to a junior college, but I kind of doubt it. I think you should just stick with construction that you're doing in the summer, the work you're doing with the contractor. So, Marie, I'll never forget this. I stood up and I said, there's no need for me to come back and talk to you. And I walked out.
Good for you.
I never spoke with the man again. So that was really motivating to me as I, went to grad school, and then finished my doctorate. I'm sure that was one of many driving forces for me to not feel that belittlement and not let that marginalize who I am. And I talked to, as a principal and then as a coach and then, teacher, and all my instances, I encourage kids and young adults to dream, follow their bliss. Don't let anyone put margins on you or labels on you.
Yeah, I think that's another really important memory too. It looks like you take setbacks and transform them, and that's part of the way you work with people. And you don't allow setbacks or limitations that seem impossible. You don't allow that to constrain how you see children or yourself.
No, I don't. I mean, in my second superintendency outside of Chicago, larger district, we were doing in a strategic plan, one of our tactics was we want to make sure that we expand opportunities for all students, be it extracurricular, be it whatever it may be, academic. And we realized that when our students graduated from high school, their class rank was being used against them as they applied at colleges across the United States. And so what we realized was we would have routinely hundreds and hundreds of students with 4.0 plus average for 4 years, very high achieving students. Then they'd apply at a state university. I just use a state university as an example. And they'd say, what's your class rank? And they would say, well, they're 150th, but they had a GPA of 4.25 on a 4.0 scale because of honors. And then they would be a student from another high school would be ranked third and have a GPA of 3.75 or whatever. And that would be used against them. So we went through a community engaged process to eliminate class rank because it was limiting student opportunities.
You get punished for everybody doing well.
Yeah, no good deed goes unpunished there.
Yeah.
But it was the pushback from the community was we were eliminating valedictorian and salutatorian.
Really?
As a result of that. Yes, we did, because we got rid of class rank.
Right.
And so we were very open with the community about what we were doing. I had a town hall meetings, open forum, and one of the town hall meetings, the auditorium was packed. And the media was covering, and all the Chicago media was covering. It was a big deal. And one of the Chicago media comes up to me and he goes, and I had talked with him before on different events. I'd done him favors with interviews. He comes up to me and he goes, you are going to get killed tonight. There's no way you can pull this off. Right before I walk up on to moderate this town hall meeting. And so long story short, we did it. The parents embraced it. The town hall went fine. Parents had their say. We listened. We had responses, and they walked out going, that actually makes sense. We don't want our kids being disadvantaged because of their high academic performance. But yeah, that's a motivator. You're right. I'm not one to shy away from challenges, and especially if it has anything to do with the well-being of kids. Then it's like, it's on.
Mm-hmm. So what about the groups that you were born into, right? Small town and the area of the United States that you were born into. You're born into a racial group. You're born into a family group. You're born into heritage. You're born into a group of educators, right? What would you say has most influenced your sense of culture and self as a leader?
You know, I grew up in a very, very small town, 2,500 people, predominantly German Catholic community in southern Indiana. My world was so closed that I didn't even know there was anything besides someone being Catholic till I was in like sixth grade. And a new student moved in, and I was in a public school. But every Wednesday, we walked across a parking lot to what we called the nun's house, the sister's house, during the school day to have religion class. And then we walked back, be there for about 45 minutes or an hour. And so we got up to go, and the new student, he didn't get up. And I said, what are you doing? He goes, I'm not Catholic. That was like a wow, aha moment. That's how limited my perspective of the world was as, growing up in that small community and small town. So those little moments like that made me think a little bit more outside the box on, okay, there's much more out there in this world than, Ferdinand, Indiana. I'm very proud of where I was raised. I know a lot of people that grew up in my southern Indiana community will besmirch, No, I'm very proud of where I grew up. I mean, you can take the boy out of southern Indiana, but you can't take the southern Indiana out of the boy. Very proud of my upbringing, my family, my parents, love my parents and my siblings, but I was limited in my perspective on the world. Then I went to Indiana University from, a small town of 2,500, high school of less than 500 to a campus of 36,000 kids with all ethnicities, religions, you name it. And so it really opened my eyes to there's a bigger world out there, Nick. And I started to learn and understand and start to appreciate differences and try very hard not to be judgmental, although, it's always a challenge. Try to extend grace to listen, but always a challenge. But anyone that grew up in a rural community like I did, like I can go back and we'll go back this weekend to spend time and be with my mom and dad and do whatever we can to help them because they're still living in the house. But we'll go to any of the local restaurants, taverns, whatever. And again, just fit right in because it's like I know the people and I talk to the people.
Right.
So that small town work ethic was instilled in me. I mean, I worked for a small subcontractor painting and wallpaper company for every summer, spring break, winter break to put myself through college and really appreciate blue collar workers and what they do and learn so much about work ethic from my parents, obviously, mostly, but doing that work, 50, 60 hours a week in the summer in very hot, humid weather not only motivates you to complete college, but it gives you an appreciation for those that are, blue collar workers and I respect them, connected with them as a teacher, principal, superintendent, making sure that our custodians were taken care of, our food service personnel.
Mm-hmm. So that sense of rootedness and sense of belonging and the ability to work in a variety of different things where you developed skills and just being connected with people that you carried with you. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. And, when you become a superintendent, you're dealing with so many things. I had a former colleague of mine, a mentor, I would say, he said, if you get 5 minutes a day talking about what you can do to improve education as a superintendent, you've had a pretty good day because you're dealing with so many things pulling on you, from negotiating contracts with the teachers to back to my formative experience, then negotiating contracts with the custodial maintenance group. Those individuals that many of them didn't go to college, but I was able to sit down with them at the bargaining table, identified with them, get to know them, and had no problems with negotiations with any of those groups. Because
they were seen. They weren't invisible.
Absolutely. I would go up on the rooftops. I would go up on wherever to visit them as well, because I had no problem doing that. That's really not normal for a superintendent to climb up on a high school roof and look at a HVAC equipment that's not working effectively and making sure the custodial maintenance guys have what they need and just to make sure you're present. So bargaining honestly was like no problem because there was mutual respect.
Mm-hmm. So I would say you grew into those. Like, I think what you're going into now is the next question I was going to ask you, which is you grew into certain groups you came from and you kept your sense of where you were and what mattered and how you could listen to people and hear them and see them. And then you grew into these new roles and these new groups.
Yeah, that's well said. I never thought about it that way, Marie, honestly. Because, when you're in it and you're doing it, you're just doing it, and you gravitate to what's familiar in those instances too.
Yeah.
When I gravitated to the custodial maintenance crew, I really did. I mean, I got along with them. I talked to them, intentionally go and be with them. I walk in the cafeterias back behind the serving line, make sure that all the, cafeteria workers were taken care of. And just to say hi, just because I had the title of superintendent didn't mean I was any more important than the food service personnel serving the kids every day. Just a different job description. Not more important.
You didn't allow your position to insulate you against others, which is something that most people don't even notice is happening to them when they change positions. I would say if you're talking about your leadership and your cultural style, you grow what you've got without forgetting where you come from. I think that's really significant. Now, you would have had to join other groups because you would be in a superintendent group. You would be in, national leadership groups. You would have been, and I'm sure you have hobbies and other things that you did, and things that your children did that you probably became a part of as well. So how has any of that influenced your development that you can think of right now?
As a superintendent joining the groups that were, either there were county organizations or state or some were, national by Midwest, I was part of those. I always tried to help out my colleagues. Mm-hmm. I think that's why it was such a natural transition to retirement, because I was not the superintendent that, was Wizard of Oz, like that you can't look behind the curtain. I was very much into making sure we had evidence-based practice and metrics, and we were looking at growth of students, and we were paying attention to that constantly while making sure we're taking care of the well-being of our students and our staff too. But as far as interacting with colleagues, I felt many times like I was an outlier in the superintendent groups because I felt that group was very closed
yes.
to interacting with their peers. That's just not me. So I
No.
didn't operate that way.
Yeah. You didn't need to be a Wizard of Oz because if you drew back the curtain, you were the full grown person with all of the skills and capacities and interests that you have. The Wizard of Oz was just a sham.
Exactly. And I work with superintendents all over the nation now that I can tell in the first 5 minutes if they want to really get into an evidence-based conversation about their mission, tell me about your vision for the district or not. And that's okay. I'm not judging them and I'm not going to waste their time because I know they're extremely busy. I can't imagine being a superintendent during a pandemic, honestly.
Right.
And I'm just here to be helpful in any way. But I just tended to want to help other colleagues out.
That's still you influencing others. I'm talking about what and who influenced you.
Obviously, influential growing up. My dad was and is a role model for me. And it's evolved into more conversation and me listening a lot because he's now, he's 90 years old. He's become more of a reflector on life. And I listen and I prompt little things like you're doing for me so I can get him to just open up a little bit. And obviously my mom as well is very formative. Unfortunately, now she's dealing with some struggles with memory as a 91-year-old. They do at times, but very formative. I had an interesting mentor and I didn't know him long. Unfortunately, he passed away, but it was right before I became a superintendent. And he was coming to our grad course, just talking about superintendent role, et cetera. And I struck up a natural connection with him. And we were having a conversation over a cup of coffee. And I said, his name was Paul. I said, Paul, I don't know if I really want to do this superintendent gig. I mean, I worked for 3 or 4 superintendents. I'm an assistant soup now. I don't know. And he looks at me and he goes, well, then do it differently. Do it your way. And I'm like, that's all I needed to hear. Mm-hmm. I was like, okay. He goes, you don't have to do it like them. Do it your way. Mm-hmm. Do it differently.
So individuals influence us. And I think that that's important to recognize that. But there are also groups that influence us. And lots of times the people that I interview on the podcast say, oh, I'm not influenced by anybody. I do my own thing and I cut my own path and I march to the beat of my own drummer. And I'm going, wait a minute. If you're not open to influence, that's not a good thing. There must be something. So sometimes the influence comes from having your own family, and that family starts to challenge you on things that you didn't expect. And you are open to different influences as a result of that. And sometimes you learn another language or you travel to another place or people make other changes in their lives. Maybe they become pickleball players. I talked to somebody who was, what the heck is pickleball is what I said. And they explained it to me and told me how it was this movement that was sweeping the country. And I was, wow. So has anything like that affected you?
As you're saying that, here's where my head goes. Obviously, my siblings, I have 4 brothers and a sister, very, very significant. And, as I grew up, wanted to model them and follow them. If they went to Indiana University, I went to Indiana University. One of my siblings went to Purdue. He's an engineer, so that made sense. But really kind of followed in their footsteps, as an athlete. So I wanted to wear my oldest brother's number for baseball. So I was really trying to model and emulate them as a youngster. And then as I pivoted into education after college, obviously my dad was still influential because he was still a principal at the time. But then I started to push the envelope on what I wanted to do because I wanted to do more. Driven to the point that probably not always healthily driven because I really wanted to excel. Sometimes when you're driven like that, you drive so hard, you may be driving by things that you should stop and spend more time with, smell the roses, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So influential with school leaders that I worked with. My last superintendent I worked for as a principal was very influential in my development because he taught me the art of building community engagement or how he did it. He was very, very, very good at it. I actually wanted to be an assistant of his before I left the district to become assistant superintendent. But he candidly told me, he goes, I'm just going to be honest with you, Nick. He goes, you're never going to work on my team because you're way too strong a leader and I just can't deal with that kind of leader. I said, okay, fair enough. So I moved on, but I really learned a lot from the guy. I thought he was outstanding at many things. I learned, and many times you learn some things not to do by watching what people do, but he was very formative. And now as I'm in a different phase, I'm learning a lot from my kids. They're adults now, so I'm listening to them and I'm learning from them. But I try to listen to my kids more now, and they have a lot to say. Son's going to be 30 in December. I have another kid who's going to be 28 in October, two bonus children. One's 24, one's 19. So I'm doing a lot of listening right now. And when appropriate, you can give them some perspective. But long answer, I think it's been evolutionary who's influenced me, and hopefully I can be a positive influence on others as well.
So let me ask you about temperament and personality. So temperament being what you're born with, and then personality, how you have built what you've experienced into who you are. So like from the time I was little, I was always running, always wanted to run towards things. And so that's been a characteristic that I've maintained. But as I got older, I learned to step back and pay attention to the surroundings and be more contextual and to not always speak or sometimes not at all. So I think that that's something I had to learn and that I grew into my personality. So how about for you? What would you say you're born with and what have you grown into?
Highly competitive. I mean, almost to the point that it was not always healthy. You know, being the youngest, I always wanted to compete and be as good as my older siblings in any sport or wherever it was, which obviously helped me become a better athlete, but competitive to the point that was my sole focus. I mean, I thought high school existed so I could play 3 sports. I really didn't get too jazzed up about academics at that time. And when you're that competitive, you do miss a lot of things because you're just driven. So then growing into personality, still growing, I think it is a part of me listening more. And when I became in a position of influence and connection to grow my leaders around me, you know, wasn't about me competing with them anymore. It was about me growing, you know, these young leaders and encouraging them to become leaders and then helping them as they became leaders. And it could be a leader of a classroom, could be a leader of a building, could be a leader of an athletic program. But I started to gravitate to that in a way. I wasn't competing with them anymore.
Right. You were growing them.
Yeah. I guess that became my personality. I always looked at my role as, even as a teacher, that I was a coach. I was coaching them. Athletics did serve me well. Still love athletics, but it served me well in that regard. I did love coaching. But it grew me into not competing anymore with everybody, but growing them and coaching them.
Yeah, because you became more curious about them and their development than you did about you winning.
Exactly. I shifted it. Now, I have to be honest with you. If I get into like any other activity, I have to watch myself not be too competitive because then it's no fun. I don't even enjoy that. If I just get that competitive, be it whatever it may be.
So you really tempered that then?
I have.
So now, what about a time when you became aware that your understanding of the world was your culture and not normal for everybody? You mentioned one when you said what the one child that didn't get up and said, "But I'm not Catholic," and you went, "What? That there's somebody in the world that isn't Catholic? How does that happen?"
Right.
So since then, has there been a time when you felt you had a cultural disconnect, cultural dissonance moment?
Well, there have been a couple, really. I'm not a practicing Catholic anymore. When I went to college at IU, I became disillusioned with the ritualistic nature of it and no individualized choice. So I moved away from that. So IU was very formative for me going to Indiana University to see that not everything is prescribed. Not everything is in lockstep. Now, that has caused some dissonance between me and my siblings and parents. Not so much now, but that was, because that's a cultural thing. If you're Catholic, that's your culture.
It is, yep.
Highly tribal, highly cultural, but I don't practice. So that was a significant shift in who I was as a member of a community, a tribe, a culture. So that was huge. Since I've retired, I initially did some equity work, and I was in numerous situations for the first time in my life where I was the only white person in meetings, audience, etc. And to keep my mouth shut and learn from other cultures and respect other cultures. In the last 4 years, I was not always embraced by everyone in those settings.
Why would you be? There's a history.
Of course. I did everything I could to respect and learn. And it was a challenge, Marie, because much of the work I did in the district outside Chicago was to advocate for the students of color that moved into the district. A little quick sidebar on Chicago had a Section 8 housing called Cabrini Green. When Mayor Daley was the mayor, he was doing great things to the city of Chicago and gentrifying certain parts of the city. And so I learned, what gentrification really means in December '08 and January '09, when thousands of families of color were displaced over their winter break because they were gentrifying this area. And the entire culture of our South Campus, high school campus, changed over winter break. And we pivoted with great leadership from the principal, and the teachers were phenomenal to create a mentoring program for transferring students and just do amazing work and outreach to these young men and young ladies. It was met with significant resistance from my board, which was formative to me because I did everything I could to advocate for these students of color and we did amazing work. So couple that with my experience in the last 4 years where I was, viewed as, why do you care about this work? And it's very passionate work for me.
Because it's about justice.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, what's more important than equal opportunity for education, for work, for housing, to be the person you were intended to be?
Right. Exactly.
What's more important than every person on the planet having access to those things? It doesn't mean everybody's a millionaire. It means everybody has access to their basic needs. People who've never experienced not having their basic needs met, they think it's easy for everybody else.
So true.
Yeah.
So true.
Or they think they're entitled to have a position of power and privilege and to earn more and know more than other people. I've frequently had people tell me that they couldn't believe that people who were in a very fancy hotel in a poor district somewhere would ask to be in the window where the poor people could see them eat the best food and just gloat over the fact that they had a better position and they could eat all this fabulous food while other people were starving, which made me feel sick to think that someone would want that.
Oh, of course it did. That's sad.
But it is common, unfortunately. But yeah, so you're motivated by equity. You're motivated by people not being invisible. You want people to be seen, to be acknowledged, and to have access, to have the doors open, and the ones that they're able to go through, they can go through, and they're not barred from entry. So,
right.
And for those who see that as a threat, they would want to shut that down.
In my head, I said we need to give these young men, young ladies keys to doors of opportunity they don't even know exist.
Right.
And we did. I was just really there to make sure they had all the resources and champion the cause.
This is your legacy. Whether you had pushback or people shutting things down afterwards or not, it's still a legacy. And it still made a difference for people in some way, shape, and form, just like that kindergarten teacher that you went and read the story for. And she was so moved by that. She asked that you be a person who be there for her funeral. We never know what effect we have on others.
No, so true.
Yeah. So it's just carry on with what's right because it's going to make a difference for somebody at some point. And that's all we can hope for, right? Do the best we can with what we've got.
Well, my wise dad said to me, when you make the right decision, you can lay your head on your pillow at night and sleep well because you know you did.
Yeah. Yeah. Your slate is clean.
Yep.
So we're reaching the end of the interview. What is the best way to work with you? What brings out the best in you? So if someone were to open the door for Nick, what would make it easy for you to walk through that door?
Well, the work I'm doing now with school leaders is to listen to them and be that unbiased, safe space to help them through these difficult times. The other thing I really would open the door for me is working with groups to help with team building, to help with coaching, to help people coming out, on the other side of the pandemic. I know groups are struggling with identity, getting along. Can we be like we were before the pandemic? So I've worked with groups like that to actually work on activities where they're above all know thyself, but getting to know their peers again, working interactively again, making sure that people are heard. Team building. And I really enjoy doing that because I sense that people just want to hear. Example, I just finished working with a group, and one of the individuals in this team building, I could tell was processing, reminded me of my one kid, processing, not, raising their hand and participating or just participating in abundance like some do, which is really interesting because schools are generally program for extroverts.
Right.
But if you listen to Susan Cain and listen to her talks on introverts, it's really opened my eyes that 40% of the students and people are introverts, and we should not take that as a negative. It's actually a gift. But, schools will give participation grades. That hurts introverts. I don't like that. I did everything I could to get rid of that. So at this team building, great conversation, things going on, and the person sitting quietly, I could tell they're ready to talk. They synthesize the entire conversation in a 2-minute sentence, 2 minutes, just encapsulated it perfectly. And their teammates looked there and goes, "Oh my God, I didn't know you were listening." Mm-hmm. And I said, "I knew you were."
Yeah.
And she just needed to feel comfortable and safe to speak.
And to process.
Any team building, working with groups and just, helping them know where the resources are to help them come out of the other side of this pandemic and working together and working with each other.
Yeah, because you can't ever go back.
No.
Yeah. So what would you like to promote? Here's your soapbox moment.
I would like to promote the work I'm doing with ECRA, which is fantastic work. If there's any school leader out there listening that wants to know if what they're doing in their classroom program, and I use program in general, whatever they're delivering instruction, if that's really having a positive connection to student achievement, which is about resources, which is about equitable distribution of instruction, which is about all those things. I'd love to have a conversation with you because I strongly believe the analytic tools that we have will give clarity to school leaders, how students are performing by ethnicity, by gender, throughout the whole scope within their school student population. And on the consulting side, if any group just wants me to come in and listen, help them with strategic planning, facilitate team building, really allow the culture of the group to be massaged and nurtured, and everyone feels like they belong to a larger mission than themselves. I think that's something I do really well too, and I enjoy doing.
Anything else you'd like to say?
No, Marie, I just want to thank you. This was not only reflective for me, gave me some insights too. I thank you for your very intentional listening and very insightful questioning. Thank you, Marie.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm sure the listeners will really benefit from hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Marie. I appreciate it.
Dr. Nicholas Wahl is not one to shy away from challenges if they improve the well-being of kids and promote social justice. Throughout his career working as a teacher, school principal, and superintendent in districts where children were disadvantaged by race and social class, he continuously stood up for what would help them access an equal playing field, no matter the potential fallout for him personally. Dr. Wahl has now taken his career in a different direction by focusing on software to help school leaders' jobs be more efficient so they can focus on the students and the staff that teach them. In his spare time, he works with youth-focused not-for-profits and coaches school leaders for success. My impression after interviewing him is that the world needs more school leaders like Nicholas Wahl. If you like this episode, do share it with a friend or colleague and take a minute to head over to our newly rebranded website page to rate and review. Go to shiftworkplace.com/podcast to get you there. Thank you for listening. And may culture and leadership connections continue to guide and inspire your day. Want to show some appreciation? You can buy me a coffee. What? How do you buy a coffee for a podcast owner? Well, there's a way. Let me explain. You go to buymeacoffee.com/Marie Gervais. That's spelled MarieGervais. So it's buymeacoffee.com/Marie Gervais. And when you go to that website, what's going to happen is you'll get a chance to click on 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 cups of coffee at $5 a piece to help contribute to the cost of the podcast. And yes, it's $5 for a cup of coffee because it's quality coffee for a quality podcast. So I hope you will contribute and you'll help us to reduce the costs of the podcast by going to buymeacoffee.com/Marie Gervais. Thank you in advance for your generous contribution.